So in this video, before it starts, I just want to say I'm going to use a lot of political, religious, and philosophical examples. I'm not taking sides in this video. It's to attribute to a grander point so that I can really drive home the point of this video. Cigarette? How did that get over there? I gotta throw that away. Oh, leaf. Things can look different based on how close you are to them. Based on the distance between you and that thing you are contemplating or seeing can look very different. Every philosophy or belief system will break down from a certain distance. Whether you're very close to something or very far, how close you are will determine your perspective upon it, how you relate to it mentally. So for instance, if we get really close to something like the ecosystem, ecology, if we look at how much trash we have on this planet, if we look at how we dispose of it, how we're not really disposing of it, and the long-term impact of all of this stuff building up and affecting our environment, we start to see how big of a problem this is, and how it's going to affect future generations. Now, if you get close to all these details, that's all you can see. And perhaps you can't see the striving and the things that people are doing to actually develop better systems for trash disposal or how to produce less of it. See, perspective has changed just a bit. Now, whether this can address the large problem that we have with our environment on this planet Earth for our future generations, that's, if these things will work good. I think that it's a very big problem, but I tend to get very close to that problem. I tend to really look at all the information and be like, well, crap, we might be screwed. So your distance to either piece of information, how messed up the planet is, or how many new forms of technology are coming out that are going to help us survive on this planet longer, your distance from these two things will determine kind of your mind's environment, your perspective, but the environment within your mind, the kind of what goes through your head, what goes around in circles in your head, what you constantly think about. But it's not just about the environment. This is a number of different things. So if we're going to talk about absurdism, for instance, as a philosophy, it steps back very far. You look at all the little details and see how absurd and pointless life is, but that attributes to a grander point. When you step back from all those details, then that's when that's the justification. You're using all the details that you got very close to form a conclusion that is, life doesn't have meaning and it can't, but the striving and the seeking isn't that bad. It's the purpose in and of itself. Everything, there might not be any meaning, we might not be able to find meaning, but the striving itself and the seeking is the purpose. So we looked at a bunch of minor details, got a bigger perspective, and then returned to kind of life in between, where we seek. Little details of nothing matters, everything's absurd. Step back, if you look at, I looked for a meaning in this, I looked for meaning here, there's no meaning here, there's no meaning there. I looked for meaning in politics, I looked for meaning in religion. That just cut off me philosophically from being a philosophical being, and it's called philosophical suicide. If you accept religion, but if you look at all the tiny details of the Bible, how it doesn't make sense, blah 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 blah, or if you look at how short our lives are and how little impact we have, so that's another detail. So look at getting really close to all these little details to attribute to a grander point, and then living in between. But once again, this is not an environment or philosophy video. This is a video about perspective and how things break down depending on distance. So another issue, for instance, let's say gun violence is rampant. We need to crack down on various kinds of guns, make assault rifles get more expensive or more restricted, really enforcing certain people not being able to have access to firearms. And you look at the statistics, how many people die from gun violence every year in the United States, how many mass shootings there are, how some years there's more mass shootings than there are days of the year, but we just don't hear about them all. I know there's certain criteria for a mass shooting. How there's so many accidents every year from that produce gun violence by accident. Family members cleaning a gun, discharging it, killing another one, or ones that are on purpose, where somebody gets mad in a family and just pulls out a gun and shoots because they don't have any impulse control. So you're looking at all these little details. Once again, none of these things are in and of themselves the point of the video. But you look at those details, get close to those details, like, oof, and then draw the conclusion that we need to restrict guns. And then some people might look at the details like, look at all the governments around the world. Look at all the governments around the world and how the ones that have restrictions on guns, people are less free. Or in history, Adolf Hitler wanted to take everybody's guns away and tried to take everybody's guns away and outlawed hunting. And that level of control over guns, whether it be Mao Zedong, people list people that have taken away other people's guns so that their tyranny could continue or could perpetuate or could, right before they doubled down. And then they look at details in the United States about people trying to restrict guns, things like that. So getting close to all these little pieces of information and then backing up to a grander perspective. It's a natural thing that we do, but it takes the small and the big. But ultimately, it requires human opinion. We take all these little pieces of information and then we decide, what is the conclusion? Because you can't, really close to all these details, you can't come to a conclusion. And really far back, you don't have the details to come to a conclusion. And then we end up existing right in the middle. But if you get close to any particular detail, any particular fact, even about religion, the Bible, or the Quran, or even the Bhagavad Gita, we're talking about religious texts, religious scriptures, or if we're talking about political philosophy, how successful or unsuccessful certain political systems have been. And ultimately, they've all kind of been unsuccessful because they have so many of the same problems between each other. So we kind of pick the best one. But there's plenty of information to show for every political philosophy that's ever been tried that none of them completely work. There's no solution and there's no detail that if we get close to, we can see it in isolation and it makes sense. Everything has to relate to everything else. But once again, it's the constant zooming in and out. It's the constant perspective changing. And whether the details look really good, look how much less plastic we're using. And then you step back further, see look how much is already on the planet polluting everything. Neither one of those are satisfactory or lead to a conclusion. I think we have to be conscious of how we process information and have a healthy combination of going in and out and realizing that we're going in and out, going in on the little details, and then backing up and seeing the grander picture. But I see a lot of the time people are becoming emotionally invested in a portion, however big that portion is, whether it's small or large, a portion of humanity agreeing with them, a portion of humanity coming around to their understanding, coming around to their way of thinking, or awakening to what's going on. There's as many as there are philosophies, political ideas, and ways of understanding things. There's that many different kinds of people who want the world to think like they do, who are emotionally invested, because they think it's linked to compassion. And there is a link there, but are emotionally invested inside themselves, internally, in a portion of humanity thinking like they do or waking up. Now, not everybody does this, but I find that most people kind of do this. And they look at the facts and they look at the things that show them to their mind that everybody's going to come around soon or eventually.
And then they go from this emotional stage of being so invested and looking for those details, finding them, and then waiting for something big to happen where everybody is starting to realize, and they don't see it, and they get crushed. They get crushed internally. The reason we have to understand perspective and how we see things and how we zoom in and out, because there's things in there that people get caught up in. People look for things that give them hope. And then when they don't see those things multiplying, or they don't see those things as actually having as much significance or as much impact on the population that they thought they did, then that's when, the heart breaks a little bit. And the faith in us as a species breaks a little bit, or the faith in humanity breaks a little bit. I think if we analyze perspective, and then we also temper our expectations with realism, then we're less likely to fall into that trap of getting in the cycle of just, trying to realize, thinking you realize, and then realizing that people aren't waking up. And ultimately what happens. What our future is our future, as a whole. Us as individual people, we can't change everything. There's been many people in history that have tried, and it never really worked out that well. And you can say, in the long term it did, but once again, us is our responsibility. Us is our path, and we have to fight these battles within, because we are a drop of a person in this huge ocean of people. Throughout time, and throughout space, because we're moving. But we have to work on the clarity of our drop. Every single life is like a bubble that you blow, a soap bubble, and then we capture a section of consciousness. Now, the quality of that consciousness, once our bubble pops, is our responsibility. We are our responsibility. Nobody else is. We are our responsibility. We have to work on ourselves within, and don't even worry about, at least definitely not the beginning of your spiritual journey, or even at a moderate stage. Don't worry so much about trying to look for something externally to make yourself feel good internally. Fight those inner battles. Narrow your scope of what you care about and what you work on. Because only our quality as a person is our responsibility. It's the only thing we can really control, that we have a right to control. So control your individual quality, and control your mind, your compulsions, and how you think. Revise everything within. Nobody's going to do it for you, and you'll live a more content life. And you won't be tied up in all these external fights that people fight with a ferociousness that they should fight their internal battles with. Expending all this effort externally for naught, but also for, and then once you actually get back to yourself, once you eventually, every time, after we get either hopeful or disappointed in the external world, we always have to return to ourselves. Then once we return to ourselves, then we find that we're not content in ourselves. And we think it's because it's something external, but it's not. It's how we process things. Any data that you have to even take in, even if you're not looking for it, fighting those internal battles, revising yourself will help you process that information so it doesn't turn into trauma after trauma after trauma, however big, however little. One little pain after another little pain. And then every little pain we have externally, it just adds to the weight on our heart. That is why we have to just worry about our internal environment. And we can do the right things externally. We can care about the external environment. We can care about, even politics a little bit, and we can care about philosophy a bit, but don't get so invested that you're not working on yourself, that you're not trying to figure out who you are, trying to feel your soul, establish a grander connection between your ego and your soul, or however you understand it. Form a greater internal connection to your gods or spirits or demons, anything like that. All that stuff is internal. You might use external rituals. And, in life, we might feel like everything's external. But we see everything through our perception, and we process everything within our head. And these are the areas through which everything has to come, so we have to revise those to live a more content life. And that's, if there's any hope, as far as something that I don't consider a bias. One thing that I don't think is a bias that I think is true is that we can change ourselves within. We can change ourselves to live a more content life. And just with that base, I think that's the one thing that I would say out of all of this, that's not a bias and that we should take hope in. I think that just who we are as individuals, as human beings, being conscious of ourselves. Animals aren't conscious to the same sense. They act purely on their compulsions and purely based on past trauma. But we can choose to be more human and change ourselves within. That's what kind of makes us different from the other animals on this planet. Doesn't mean they don't matter. Doesn't mean they don't have feelings. They can't feel things. They don't have souls. But we as human beings can choose. We can choose to work on ourselves within. And I think that I can say that with finality. I don't think that's a bias. There's a lot of people that believe in free will or that don't believe in free will and think that everything's a compulsion, just like animals. I would fundamentally disagree with them, but I think that's the only hard stance that I have in all of this. So I think that there is a reason to hope. And I think that reason to hope is intrinsic to being human. So I think that's the one fact that I have out of all of this. And my personal opinion is that we are in an ascending age, Dwapara Yuga, and there's a lot more people starting to become, spiritual, not religious, starting to practice and believe in ways that don't involve fear of hell or fear in general. I see a lot more openness, and I see a lot more, you can say, relationship between ourselves and our environment and ourselves and various kinds of gods, various kinds of spirits. But once again, this is my bias. I'm looking for the things that I find hope in. And I looked, in Hinduism, I subscribe to the idea of Dwapara Yuga, which means we're in an ascending age. So that is my bias, and that is what gives me hope when I look for these details and what I believe. But once again, if we look at everybody as a whole, my belief falls apart, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I don't believe it, but it does, and I recognize that it does because then I'm looking for those hopeful details. And just some more of my belief is that, a lot of people, it's going to be a while before we see more of this. And once again, this is my bias. It's going to be a while before we start to see a lot of people either waking up or realizing things or realizing that spirituality is like for everyone. And it's not, no one religion or spiritual path has monopolized it or can monopolize it. It's for everybody. And multiple paths are fine. And our connection to the gods and the positive side of the astral planes and our connection to different spirits in different realms is going to start happening in a more and more positive way. We're still a long way off, maybe 100 years, 200 years off from it really kicking in. But, see, that's my bias. But those are the details I look for that give me hope. And I want to say for anybody who also believes like me, don't expect it to happen soon. Keep that zoomed out, grander perspective even when you're looking for all the hopeful details. But see, this is my bias. This is where I see that my thinking is flawed, and I need to revise myself within to be more even-handed in how I look at things and to not just look for the things that I like. We have to realize that changing ourselves is the only way that we can go forward. It's the only way we can really reach a satisfying state of existence. Whatever is happening in the world, whatever is going on, whether it's hopeful, where either way you find hope in it or you don't find hope in it, just realize that all you can do is change yourself. So also the reason why it's good to analyze perspective and kind of think about how we process information, think about how we come to our conclusions, is because a lot of the time there's so much inner work to do, and you find how you think when you analyze these things. You find out how your mind works, and that's the first step to taking agency and taking your compulsions under your own advisement and taking your trauma, the history of your trauma, under your own advisement. Instead of it be trauma or pain in your past becoming a reoccurring painful experience, we can transform it into knowledge to where it doesn't spark that pain in us. It doesn't trigger the same pain again and again and again. And it becomes knowledge about how to move forward and how to avoid these situations or how to deal with these thoughts when they come up. We have to transform our past into knowledge, and we have to realize that our compulsions to look for certain things, look for hope, or look for how everything's bad, or to too quickly think, too quickly take a stance, too quickly to draw conclusions. Those are also compulsions, not just a compulsion to eat or to sleep too much, things like that, but our ways of thinking have compulsions in them. Taking control of those compulsions, a lot of it has to do with perspective, and then being able to really bring your thoughts under control, taking control of those compulsions, and then understanding your past in proper perspective can bring a state of inner control. I don't know if you want to call it peace, but certainly contentment. Because peace is a little bit too far to you have to temper your expectations. But you can live a content life if you are willing to look for those how you think, fight those little battles, transform yourself within, and let the world do its own thing. But you'll find that once you transform what's within, you'll find you're in a whole different world, because you start to realize all these ways that you were thinking that just didn't work or didn't make sense, or that looked at with too much scrutiny falls apart. When I say belief systems or political structures or philosophies all fall apart from a certain distance, and they can, but that's a willful direction that you're looking at it from and a willful distance. If you look at things from multiple angles, you'll find that they're broken on multiple sides. It's just the one side you're looking at that you shifted yourself into to make it look good. But, the reason I brought up all the philosophy and politics is because within our own beliefs and our own way of thinking breaks down when we look at it. And that's okay when you realize that. The whole point is to realize that and then to revise yourself. And once you do that, you'll find you're in a whole different world, like externally, because you realize a lot of the ways you thought weren't correct or weren't the most effective. And then you can decide how and when and in what way to expend your effort. Expend your effort as a person, expend your effort as a soul, expend your effort on your spiritual path, and expend your effort in how you want to operate in the external world, what you want to back, what you don't want to back. But it all starts within ourselves. We have to realize the cracks in the way we think, what we believe, in order to change within. And then, honestly, it doesn't matter if things get better. It doesn't matter if things get worse, but you're able to handle them. And you're able to just be you and be stable in a world that's full of people that are led by compulsions, that are led by even a very big misunderstanding about their past or this trauma of a certain kind of person that hurt them, and then just hating anybody else who has any of those qualities. Then you cut yourself off from people. But if they're very toxic qualities, you want to avoid them, but you don't have to be emotionally engaged in it. You can dislike somebody and think somebody is even evil without having any emotional tie to that person, without giving that person, that kind of person or that person, power over your emotions. Because if they have power to make you angry just by thinking about them, they have so much control over you, and you don't have agency over your life and your emotions. Some techniques that will help you fight these internal battles might be useful for me to include. So one technique is when you are going to sleep. First of all, meditation really helps. Sit very briefly. I can describe a very simple way to meditate. Sit cross-legged, find yourself a pillow, or meditation cushion is the best. Or probably a good one might be $25. But you can also use a pillow or a blanket that you ball up. Sit on it cross-legged. If it's hard for you to sit cross-legged, kind of work on sitting more and more cross-legged. You can slowly bend in your legs, and eventually your legs will be used sitting like that. Or sit in a chair with your back straight. Your back should be definitely straight. Now rest the back of your hands and point your pointer finger and your thumb together. Rest the back of your hands on your knees. As you're meditating, keep your back straight. Breathe evenly. So you might want to count 4 seconds to see how it feels. Hold in for 2, then let out for another 4 seconds. Leave out for a couple seconds, and then breathe back in. So you can count just to get used to how long it takes you to do breaths. But really, you shouldn't be counting when you're actually meditating. And when you're sitting there on your meditation cushion or however you're sitting, make sure that not only is your back straight, but your breath is even and consistent. So consistency is better than this amount of seconds, that amount of seconds. And you can also place the palms of your hands on your knees, It's not best to cup your hands in your lap for beginners. You want to like spread out your lungs so that you can really feel yourself breathe and focus on it. So that's why I usually say rest your hands on your knees, but and get used to how it feels. Counting how long 4 seconds feels like when you're breathing. 2 seconds, things like that. But when you really easy and simple, not necessarily a mantra, but saying that helps you meditate is when you breathe in, you mentally say. So elongate so in your mind to kind of last the length of when you're breathing in, then hold just for a second or two, and then breathe out saying hum. So hum. It may be hard for you to say something just in your head. It's if you're not used to practice like this, then it's like a whole different thing. But if you say it with the back of your mouth, the back of your tongue, that's fine if that's how you start. But ideally, anything that you say, whether it be a mantra like Ma, Kali, and I extend those words when I'm breathing, just saying it mentally. Sometimes the back of my tongue wants to do it, but I just say it mentally, Ma, Kali. You can also say Om, something, any kind of mantra, then Om. But you might want to make it simple and be like 2 different words when you first start. So you might want to set a timer on your phone. You might have a little alarm clock as long as it's a pleasant sound, and you can turn down the volume a bunch. You might want to set, you might want to start out in 5-minute increments, and then after a few days of doing, a couple sessions of 5 each day, or 1 session of 5 a day, you might want to move it to 7, then 10, 15 minutes. You want to get to a place of 15 minutes, kind of hold there for a while. And then you can go to 20 minutes, but get used to it first. You want to get used to meditation. And when you first start meditating, thoughts are just going to keep on coming into your head, but always bring yourself back to your breath. Focus on your breathing evenly and slowly, and focus on those words that you're saying mentally. If you don't want to say any words mentally, if you just want to meditate in silence, that is great. But the words kind of help. It helps you stay in contact with your breath when you say these words mentally. But if you don't want to say any words at all, that's great. And just focus on every time you feel a thought coming in, just kind of, I like to think of it as brushing it away, but it's more accurately like just allowing it to pass. Thinking of it more like an echo than a thought. Thinking of it more like external noise than the noise that's happening within your inner being. Those surface level thoughts that just flutter in our heads, allow them to pass just like you would a bird or a plane or anything like that. Forcing it out is counterproductive, or you can kind of just shoo it off without, saying something mentally. Don't beat yourself up mentally. Be like, oh, why can't I stop thinking? Don't do that. Just bring yourself back to your breath. If you're doing words in your head, you can do that. And, so once again, starting out, you might want to say it with the back of your tongue by accident, but ideally just in your head. And just keep on bringing yourself back to those words and your breath especially, and just allow those surface thoughts to just kind of pass, or just kind of breathe, kind of like lightly brush them out. And then over time, it'll get easier to not have those little surface thoughts that come fluttering in. Now, as you're going to sleep, another technique to help you is just imagine kind of throwing everything that you own into the fire. You don't have to be people, of course, but like anything that you own, as you're going to sleep, just imagine detaching from it not being a part of your life, you not being tied down by material things. But this has been cited a number of times by various gurus or people who practice detachment and kind of teach about it, is that just imagine throwing all of your stuff into the fire and kind of as you're going to sleep, kind of disconnecting your stuff from materials in the external world out of your life, and just getting rid of it mentally. Just imagine that, and you can get used to the idea as you're walking around in your life, because right before you go to sleep, that might kind of instills in your subconscious, I don't need all this stuff. Another thing is always keep everything in perspective. Ask yourself when you're getting mad, or when you're getting frustrated, or when you're getting sad, like ask yourself, does this really matter? Is this necessary for me to react in this way? How big of a problem is this? When you first start doing this, especially if you're prone to getting angry like I used to be, it might be hard. You have to constantly remind yourself. That's why you have to think about it a lot in order for it to become a reaction. In order for anything that happens in the external world to actually bring that out, it takes a while to instill that in yourself. But always ask yourself, does this really matter? Do I have to become emotionally invested to such an extent it's going to disturb me internally so much? Another thing that can help you is honestly, to help you live a more content life and to fight those internal battles, is to keep a regular thought journal. So period, like usually, every day is good, but maybe every other day, every third day, if it's too much of a deal to make it every day, then just to, set a time at the end of the day where you write down, what did I think about a whole lot? How did my day go? What is an issue that I've had that's reoccurring? Am I reacting well to things? What could be, could I make better in my life to where I'm more content, more happy? And just kind of track your thoughts, track how your life is developing inside your head in reaction to the external world. And, over time, you'll start to see certain trends. You'll start to see things that you return to, the circles that you go into. And a lot of the time you might find, these ways out of these, these cycles that you get stuck in. But keeping a thought journal and how you kind of an internal space journal, and, things that happen externally too, but it's very much your reaction to things is the focus, but how everything works in your head. Keeping a journal like that will help you in the long run be able to mitigate compulsions and not get trapped in this reliving, fighting these old battles unsuccessfully and keep on defeating yourself again and again and again. A thought journal will help greatly. And, remember, a big part of what we're talking about is processing trauma, taking something that was painful in our past, understanding it in the proper light, but understanding it in a more complete light and making it into knowledge rather than something that keeps on causing you pain. So noticing how you think is very important, so a thought journal is useful. Another thing that can help, though I wouldn't necessarily call it a method or technique because there's many, is that put aside a time of the day where you can just look upon an image of a particular god, goddess, spirit, deity, daemon. Set aside a time when you can kind of do puja. So if you're not Hindu, if you're watching this, you're probably spiritual of some kind. If you're not, a lot of these things will still work. But this one is particularly, you could say, religious or spiritual. Set aside a time to where, if you have a statue, if you have a sigil, you have a symbol, you have a veve, something. Set aside a time where you can sit down in front of this thing and gaze upon it, speak to this spirit or God, speak to this being, or speak to this symbol, speak to this spirit, whatever it is. Set aside a time where you can speak to this thing and talk to it like it's a person. Because, if you have gods, spirits, demons, whatever, and, you want to work with them, or you're devoted to them, or you love them, or you worship them, whatever it is, set aside a time where you can just talk to them, whether it be one or many. And have things that, you put before them. Or maybe you want to make offerings to yourself or your future development. But this is mainly for, if you're making offers to a god or spirit or even a demon. But set aside time where you're speaking to this being or beings, and you're placing something in front of them, an offering. Maybe you want to make a little bit of food. Maybe you want to set aside some change, something like that, and have a bowl where you place this in, or you want to place some food on a plate. And then after a day of it sitting there, you take it out, you put it outside. That's a good way to dispose of an offering. But set aside time to where, and this isn't a lot of time, 5 to 10 minutes is good, where you're speaking to it about either your problems, what you want in your life, and just what you think of them and how you think they can help you. But also, just honestly, if you're in a more worship-minded way like I am with Ma Kali, then just talk about how much you love them and how much they mean to you, and give them little offerings. It's great to meditate in front of these images or these beings as well. But just set aside some time where you can talk to your beings, where you can have a spiritual conversation with the beings that you care about as an individual, and the ones that you look up to, that you seek guidance from, and that you have chosen to kind of make as some, central to your spiritual life, your mission in this world, or how you're going to improve. But you set aside just a little bit of time every day to make little offerings. Offerings are necessary, but at least set aside time to speak to them. And, offerings are good if you're in a more worship mindset, like I said. And, if there's various magical things that you do, or various things that you do in puja, whether it's, pouring some water over the statue, or offering, petals off of a flower, or you're rearranging crystals in a certain way and burning a candle for them, putting some oil in that candle, burning it for them, for your connection to those beings. Set aside some time every day. So this will help your internal battles vastly, because once again, all these connections are made internally. They're not made externally. You can even say they're made through the pineal gland, the transdimensional gland, or just, within the lotus of your heart, or your brain, the neurosynapses, however you think that these connections happen, they're happening within. They're not just happening externally. The external things help, and they help make those connections, but the connections are within. So if you want to, mitigate your focus on the external world, live a more content life, and fight those internal battles that, really you should be fighting, but also it's the only ones you can really fight to and succeed in so many ways rather than, all the limited success in the external world. If you want to fight those internal battles and do so well, remember your spirits, remember your gods and goddesses, remember your demons, whatever they be. Remember those beings that matter to you, that are beyond the material that we are, that are beyond humanity or inhumanity, however you want to look at it, or the grander soul. Make some time for that. They will help you fight those internal battles, and hopefully that you have some beings like that. But don't forget them when you're trying to fight these internal battles that matter so much. Another thing that'll help you fight those internal battles is contact with nature. Now, this may seem external. It may seem like an external thing to connect with or worry about, but I assure you that the memory in our DNA that goes back millions and millions of years has lived with this environment, close to this world and its life. We have such a paper-thin veneer separating us and nature. And if we can break that veneer, and it's mostly cultural and societal and kind of pride that we're like the greatest on this planet, but if you can remain humble in nature and break that veneer, have contact with nature, physical contact with your bare feet, with your bare hands, feel trees, feel earth. I know this sounds very hippie-like, but have contact with nature, have contact with plants, with soil, and just observe little details. But just have physical contact with nature. Take time to put your hands on a tree and close your eyes and breathe in slowly and try to feel that energy, or just put your hands on trees and run your fingers through like the bark, have contact with the soil, feel leaves, notice details of grass. But try to remain silent in your mind and just notice all the details. Have contact with nature. The more you physically touch nature, you'll find that it brings anxiety away from you. It brings anxiety from that internal world and can destroy a little bit of it. It's not gonna, change your whole life, but it can destroy little sections of your anxiety bite by bite. The more contact you have with nature, and honestly, you'll find over time that you miss it. When you're inside of a building, you'll miss it. And when you're stuck inside of your head, you'll miss it, and you'll go out to nature and look for solutions. Look for solutions in branches and twigs and roots and bark. You'll find these serendipitous solutions just by observing detail, with your tactile contact with nature. I can't explain it completely, but I can't overestimate it, because it's this tactile connection with nature can really help you fight your internal battles in a way that's hard to conceptualize. But it helps resolve through energy, if that makes any sense. If you're watching this channel, you probably believe in some kind of energy, but it definitely helps you resolve some things just by that breaking that veneer between us and nature and having contact with it. It'll help you fight those internal battles and help you on your way to victory in these internal battles. So in conclusion, this went on kind of a long time. In conclusion, just fight those internal battles. Look at how you think, look at perspective, look at how you're looking at details, and then how you're stepping back and all the phases in between. And really, I think that's a way to live a more content life. At any rate, thank you very much for watching. Feel free to share this video. Feel free to like this video. It also helps out the channel a lot. Feel free to leave comments. I'm more than open to responding to comments as long as they are polite. At any rate, I hope this was useful, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day.